Hello, I'm Wendy Tiano.
And I am Rod Hardy. We are members of the Training and Consultation staff at Intermediate Unit 1 in Cole Center, Pennsylvania. We are here to talk about the progress monitoring within the RtII Framework. The following is an overview of the purpose and process of progress monitoring, as well as using progress monitoring to guide instructional decisions within the three-tiered system.
We're here today to talk about RtII in Pennsylvania, data analysis, teaming, and progress monitoring. Our goals are to clearly define an effective RtII model, define progress monitoring and its purpose, and also to define the process for data analysis teaming. As we know, RtII is a three-tier model. It's a three-tier framework, and that framework ensures that scientifically validated interventions are used at a high degree of fidelity. This allows for the collection of valid, reliable, and functionally meaningful data that inform both identification and intervention decisions. Tier 1 is considered the tier where we focus on core programming, universal screening, and data analysis teams. And it is a standards aligned system for all students. Tier 1 interventions for all students are to be delivered during the core instruction through the use of differentiated instruction and large group or small group instruction. When we take a look at student performance, we can look here on this example. We have Kashan. We talk about the performance of Kashan versus expected functioning. So based on a one-time assessment, if we take a look at Kashan, he's significantly discrepant from the expected level of functioning. However, what's the content of Kashan's performance? So Kashan's in the green. He performs well below expectations. When we look at him compared to his peers, he's performing at the same level as his peers. What if Kashan's class is okay and he's not? So we're looking here. Kashan demonstrates a clear discrepancy from his peers, and the core curriculum is working for his peers. So we want to be careful when we look at data. We want to make sure what we're looking at. Are we looking at a whole group? Are we looking at a school? Are we looking at an individual compared to a classroom, an individual compared to some other piece of information? When we move to Tier 2, we also talk about standard protocol interventions. We're looking more for small group behavior. This can, Tier 2 interventions can be delivered within the core time, or they can be delivered as a pull-out. It's increased time for instruction, and progress monitoring must take place. And this Tier 2 is targeted interventions for some students, where Tier 1 is for all. So what do Tier 2 interventions do? They're an increased opportunity to learn, increased instructional time, small group instruction, increased assessment via data collection and analysis twice per month. And again, we're going to look at the data to base decisions on whether students need more opportunities, instructional time, small group. We're going to decide what changes might need made to help that student at Tier 2 succeed. What is the purpose of progress monitoring? Progress monitoring in RtII is an essential component of the model. once benchmarking has been completed, students are assigned to either strategic or intensive intervention groups, and it's critical that students progress as the interventions are implemented to be determined. The data collected through progress monitoring are used to inform instruction, to make database decisions about changes in the intervention or goals, and to prove the needed data to determine the level of responsiveness to intervention within an eligibility decision-making model. Progress monitoring is an ongoing process of assessment and evaluation. It involves repeated measures of growth over time. It's a combination of assessment and evaluation. It's collecting and analyzing data, and evaluation is making the instructional decisions based on the review and analysis. Most educators have been collecting data on students. However, many have not been analyzing the data to make decisions about student progress and instruction. Progress monitoring is a process that works when comparing the student to general outcomes of the school community and when comparing the student to specific skills on an IEP. It is a cyclical process that moves from knowing the goal, measuring it appropriately, making informed decisions, and reviewing instructional strategies. It is used to assess student performance, the quality of his or her rate of improvement or responsiveness to intervention, adjust the student's instructional program to make it more effective and suited to the student's needs, and to evaluate the effectiveness of intervention. And anyone wishing to get more information regarding this can go to www.intensiveintervention.org, the National Center for Intensive Intervention. So why do we progress monitor? Teachers use progress monitoring data to increase student motivation and achievement through specific feedback. When you have students who can document their own progress monitoring, it usually tends to be a very motivating activity for them. It's also used to provide clear evidence using data of what is working or not working. It's very important when you do choose an intervention not to have more than one or two interventions for a specific skill going at one time. You want to be very clear on what is working to support that student's learning and what is not. Maintaining an organized record of students' performance, communicating progress with parents, other teachers, administrators in an easy to understand format. Oftentimes the jargon we use is confusing to lay people. Having a graph that clearly shows what's being done and what has worked for students is oftentimes a useful tool. Providing IEP teams with comprehensive, actionable data and setting clear student expectations. Keep in mind that most educators have been collecting data on students. We've talked about this in an earlier slide. Oftentimes, though, many may have not been analyzing the data to make decisions about student progress and instruction. Progress monitoring is a process that works when comparing the student to general outcomes of the school or community and when comparing the student to specific skills on an IEP. It's a cyclical process that moves from knowing the goal, measuring it appropriately, making informed decisions, and again, reviewing instructional strategies. Students with more ambitious goals tend to achieve more. Increasing the frequency of measurement increases the reliability of measurement and increases student achievement. Graphing of student performance data enhances decision making and increases student achievement as well. And teachers who review visual data have better achievement for their students than those who do not use rules. So to recap everything, we want to begin with valid, reliable, and appropriate progress monitoring measures. We want to graph our data to see patterns. We're going to ask questions about data patterns to arrive at a hypothesis about student responsiveness, and we're going to use our hypothesis to inform changes to intervention or assessment if the data indicate that a change is needed. So how do we implement this data-driven change? Some things we can look at are the purpose and appropriateness of the task, the complexity of that task, the size of the task, time allotted for the task, and pacing. We also want to make sure that we have an environment conducive to learning for that situation. What order are we putting that learning in, or what sequence? What procedures and routines are used? What resources or materials do we have available to us? How are we going to apply or demonstrate the knowledge that we want students to have? And what level of support is needed for those students? We want to work towards independence, participation, and motivation. We're going to replicate practice of effective interventionists, and we also want to make sure that we're assessing student response to any adjustments we make. So when we look at graphs, particularly academic graphs, we want to look for a trend in improvement. You can see here that the trend line is exceeding the goal line. When we see a data path like this, we want to consider increasing the goal that the student has and make sure that that goal is appropriately ambitious. Here you see that the data in the intervention phase is similar to the baseline, creating a flat trend line. In this example, scores are highly variable with significant changes from day to day. So again, we have questions to ask ourselves. Why are they variable? What's happening? Why isn't there consistent growth? This student shows that their scores are improving, but not as steeply as the goal line. Therefore, there is not enough growth to meet the long-term goal. Again, we're going to want to decide, okay, what changes do we need to make? Is it an environmental change that we should make? Is there an intervention change we should make? Is the group size the students in too large? Again, questions that have to be asked when we're making decisions based on rate of improvement. So when do we progress monitor? The frequency of progress monitor is determined by the level of the intervention. For benchmark intervention Tier 1, progress monitoring is usually conducted 3 times per year, fall, winter, and spring, but some tools such as Foresight can be conducted more frequently. For strategic intervention, which is for students at some risk, progress monitoring should occur about once every other week and not less than once per month. Data obtained every other week would allow more confidence in the outcomes when grade level teams examine the data to determine the progress of the student. Students receiving intensive interventions need to be monitored at least once per week. Twice per week in reading is also acceptable. Given that these students are already at risk for academic failure, progress monitoring for this group is essential at a more frequent rate than for strategic. Here you can see that the Tier 2 and 3 intervention is working well for students 18 and 19, so it can be judged to be an effective intervention. It is not working for student number 20. And you can see here we have student 18 and we have student 19. Our last student, student 20, is not making progress, so we would have to make changes for them. Here you have a complete view of the framework for RtII. Again, Tier 3, we have progress monitoring. It's more frequent. We have more increased time for instruction, standard protocol interventions, and very small group or one-on-one situations. Tier 3 is in addition to the core instruction. It uses standard protocol interventions, supplemental instructional materials, small intensive flexible groupings. It can be outside of the general ed classroom, tutoring can be provided, and increased monitoring weekly. So once we've done our progress monitoring and we've provided instruction, we're going to look at having a grade level data team meeting. So what does that look like? We want to have teams of like teachers working together. We're going to assess critical data on all students' performance related to achievement and standards, analyze data and find which students have which gaps in attainments, set measurable goals to close the gap, and then identify and implement research-based instructional strategies. Before each meeting, we want to have data that's prepared for the meeting in a teacher-friendly format. This can be given to teachers in advance if you wish. You may have a core team that gets together to do a preliminary look at the data. Then the data is going to be sent to your teachers, and you're going to provide written prompts for teachers to use when looking at data before the meeting. For instance, tomorrow is our meeting. Please take a good look at your DIBELS data before we meet and think about strategies that you are using now to discuss and brainstorm. We always want to keep in mind what we're using, what strategies we're using in our instruction so that we can think about if they're working or if they are not working. Also in these meetings, you might want to assign a timekeeper to keep everybody on track and talk about and taking a look at how we're doing getting through our agenda. The principal is key to the meetings, or the facilitator that's assigned. They're going to set the tone for the meeting protocol. You want your meetings to be highly structured. You want to use your time efficiently and be respectful, positive, and student-centered and not judgmental. We're here for everybody to help one another. We want to support one another as well as support our students. If we stick to a script of some kind or a protocol, it's going to eliminate any guesswork. It's going to help us be more comfortable, and it'll keep us from spinning our wheels or just kind of admiring the problem and not making progress. Okay. And then some expectations for meetings could be to begin looking at the groups of students. That would be your grade level data. Go to small groups or individual students after benchmark grade level needs are addressed. And then we're going to want to look at our data meeting structure. So it could be one similar to this, where we review our data sets. We identify current performance of the whole grade level. We set measurable goals for the grade level. We identify research-based instructional strategies. We analyze suggested strategies that our colleagues might propose. We select and agree to implement strategies. We plan logistics of strategy implementation. And then we identify which students will need more frequent assessment. Then that would be our Tier 2 and 3 students. Okay, and then we'll note our next meeting date. So when we speak to reviewing prepared data sets, they can be any type of display that's easy to read and that's going to give the type of information to make decisions regarding all students. So here's an example. It's called a histogram. Right? So for Tier 1, an intervention record, We might use this for a SIRF form, and we're going to take the data, record this on our SIRF form, okay? So we'll look at our data and our SIRF form at the same time when we're in our meeting. So what does a SIRF form look like? So for Tier 1, the record form, we have the date of our meeting, we have whether it's the beginning, middle, end of the year, and the grade level involved. We want to make sure all attendees are listed and their position. And then we take a look at our target skill, the percentage of students at proficient level based on the benchmark standard. So that kind of information could be found in the histogram that we looked at a moment ago. Also on your SIRF form, you want to indicate who is implementing the strategy, when they will do it, and where, and if teachers are modeling strategies. The team should discuss issues such as who is covering classes if this teaching and modeling would take place. Next, we want to make sure that we identify the current performance of the grade level. So we're going to write goals that tell us what percent of students have attained benchmark or proficient, the percentage of students that are still developing, emerging, or at some risk, and then finally students that are deficient in the skill. Those students that are going to be Tier 3 for intervention, or they're below basic. That can be entered on this SIRF form as well. So you'll see here that after you put your demographic information in, you have the target skill. That's the percentage of students proficient based on the benchmark standard. So X amount of students were proficient at phonemic segmentation fluency at the fall benchmark, and then our goal for our winter benchmark if we've already benchmarked in the fall. So what is our goal? Okay, when we come back after benchmarking in the winter, we're going to then set another goal for the next quarter. Once we've set goals and we know who our audience is, we're going to identify specific strategies for teaching the target skill, and we're going to keep focused on scientifically validated strategies. We're going to take a look at the strategies that are suggested by our peers. We want to try to make sure that they are research-based. We want to make sure they're practical, and we want to take a look at our curricular materials that are available for implementation of that strategy. If we don't have the materials we need, are they easily made? Is there a reference source that we can go to get them from? So we want to be very clear on what is needed to implement this strategy that we've chosen. Once we agree on our strategy, we want to make sure that we explicitly describe that strategy on the SIRF form so that anybody picking it up understands what's going to take place. We're going to identify the logistics, what instructional materials are going to be used. Do we need to set aside time to create, locate, or adapt any materials for students? Do we need to support one another and teach each other the strategy, or support some of the teachers at the grade level to make sure that they have an understanding of that strategy? How are we going to do that? Are we going to use peer modeling? Do we have a coach that's going to take care of it? Do we have discourse among ourselves regarding the implementation and how it should take place? Do we have specialists in our building that can demonstrate strategies for us? So these are the logistical things that we have to make sure we have a clear understanding of. And you can see here where there's a list for strategies selected, and then the logistics for implementation. And remember, you never want to choose too many strategies to be utilized at one time, because when we do our progress monitoring, we want to be able to identify what has worked and what hasn't. After identifying Tier 1, we're going to make sure that we take a look at our Tier 2 student needs. In that case, we're going to be listing the name of each student at Tier 2, the assessment measure that they were deficient in, and the score they received. We'll set a goal for next quarter, just as we did for Tier 1, and then we're going to select strategies for implementation, document those logistics as needed. For Tier 2 students, we want to make sure that progress monitoring occurs at least once a month. Twice a month would be best, but if that is not logistically possible, once a month is sufficient. We're going to make sure for each grouping we have at Tier 2, we put the student's name, the measure that they're going to be instructed in, where the intervention takes place, the person responsible for instructing that group of students, and the frequency of the progress monitoring. Once we finish with our Tier 2 students, we're going to move on to Tier 3. Again, identifying those students that need even more assistance. What's the status of progress monitoring for these students, and who in the building is trained? Again, our Tier 3 students will be identified by name, the assessment measure that they were deficient in, and their score. We will also set a goal for the next quarter, and when we are looking at student groupings, we're going to make sure again that we put student names, strategies, the personal responsible, and then the frequency of progress monitoring, which in the case of Tier 3 students should be once a week. Remember that it's very imperative that we keep a close watch on progress of these students. And finally, we're going to set a time for our next meeting date. We may have interim meetings in between. Remember, all the tier intervention groups are flexible, so we want to make sure that we have open communication at least monthly, so that we can talk about students that are meeting their goals and what their next step for those students should be. We hope this overview has been helpful. The information has been adapted from Lehigh University of Pittsburgh, the Parent Network, and the PA Training and Technical Assistance Network. You can contact Rod Hardy or myself at the information at the bottom of this next slide. There are handouts that are attached for the SIRF form, the PowerPoint as well, and any online resources that are available to you. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.